after making plenty of videos about Cave Story, it really was only a matter of time before I got around to Daisuke Amaya's other games. Since I've already covered Ika-chan and Rockfish in previous videos, I feel like it's about time we cover another major game that Pixel made. A game I actually never played until a couple years ago. That game being Kero Blaster. Now, I'm gonna be so honest with you all. I originally had no clue where to start with this video. I fully wanted to have this video done ages ago, but the further you dig into Kero Blaster, the more there is to uncover. And the further I delay this video, the more stuff is discovered. This silly little frog game actually has some development and publishing lore, great secrets, lost media, and a leaked beta with a completely different plot. If you think my coverage on Cave Story has made me crazy, well, let me tell ya, trying to make this video faithful has been driving me insane. Trust me, I wanted this video to be out shortly after the Ika-chan one, but this game is kinda packed with so much and is beloved by so many Cave Story and Studio Pixel fans. I really had to take my time, lock in, and hit the forums, interviews, and of course, the game itself. Really, covering this game could have been its own mini-series of videos on my channel, but the idea of making a mini-series that does this one game justice sounds far more stressful. Seriously, who in their right mind would make a series of videos discussing the topics, details, and lore around just one indie game? Anyways, jokes aside, I don't want to delay this any longer. I think we all saw this coming, but before I even touch Kero Blaster, I want to go back to a time when the game wasn't even Kero Blaster at all. Back to a time when Kero Blaster was known as Star Frog. Star Frog, also known as Kero Blaster, was the beta version of Kero Blaster. Fun fact, the only reason Pixel never stuck with the G in Kero Blaster is because his kid thought it sounded gross, as Gero can translate to vomit in Japanese. Anyways, it's tough to pinpoint exactly when it began development, as Pixel has been one to admit that he works on so many different projects at once. But what we do know is that Kero Blaster was the project he decided to tackle after scrapping the work he had put into Rockfish in 2012. That said, traces of Star Frog go back much further. This can be seen with its unnamed hero character, the Frog. The frog in Star Frog is a simple green frog with nothing too notable about him other than a necktie and Pixel's signature art style. This frog has been hanging out in Pixel's doodles for 25 years. There's several places you might have seen this frog already. The most popular answer to where you might have seen this frog is from Twitter user @Oxygen. Yep, this user has been making art of the frog for years now, and that's because @Oxygen is Pixel's art account. Yep, Pixel has become a pretty large digital artist, and understandably so. To go a little bit more in depth, a lot of the art he posts is of his original characters, Sasuke, Chinono, Keilu, and most famously, Ame. This ragtag group of characters go back to the year 2000 with the first issue of Pixel's own 4-Koma, Ame manga. This little series tells you very cute stories of Keilu, Sasuke, and Ame as they go through really odd yet funny misadventures. Ame herself never speaks, so a lot of her comedy is told through action, while Sasuke and Keilu do a lot of the speaking around her. I'd love to recommend the manga. You can find it on the Cave Story tribute site, translated in multiple languages. But do keep in mind, it's definitely a strange comic, but I still love it. What were we talking about again? Oh right, Star Frog. Many people immediately assume Keilu and Ame are the main characters of the game because of their striking similarities, but Pixel has gone on multiple instances of implying and directly stating that they're definitely different. The last place you might recognize these characters is definitely becoming less likely as time goes on, but technically the first major widespread images of them come from the Nintendo Wii's Developer's Voice series, specifically the episode discussing Cave Story. While discussing his art process, we get a small glance of what definitely appears to be Keilu and Ame. Yup, this duo, at the very least, have been living rent-free in Pixel's head for decades now, and I'm glad to see that they've become iconic in their own ways. When it comes to Star Frog though, it definitely seems like the duo of cat and frog is a game idea Pixel has been waiting to make. On the off chance you did want to see Ame and Keilu in video game form, however, you can play Azarashi on mobile. The duo appear as rare chances in place of the seals instead that usually show up in the gameplay. Once again, getting back to Star Frog, we make our way back to the star, the frog. The original plot of the game consisted of our hero simply wanting to bring flowers to their love, the cat, before she's suddenly abducted by aliens. The game goes on with you and a pilot friend trekking around the world to save and find her. From summer 2012 to January 2014, Pixel would share screenshots, artwork, gameplay outlines, and so much more about the game's development on both his development log and Twitter, mostly sharing alpha screenshots and alpha footage. On top of this, we also get a very early trailer for the game when it was known as Kero Blaster, and the game seems like a really polished experience. In 2013, it even seemed like Nicholas was on board with wanting to help Pixel make 3DS and PS Vita versions of the game, with the 3DS version even being seen in playable form by an image shared by the founder of Nicholas. Eventually, the game would go through a development reboot, similar to Cave Story. While it's unsure when this development reboot would happen specifically, we wouldn't begin to see elements that more resemble the Kero Blaster we know today until around October 2013. The most important change to production was the introduction of Kyoko Kawanaka. Kawanaka was a friend of Pixel's who jumped in to help Pixel finish Kero Blaster, primarily helping out with level layout and maintaining direction for the game post-reboot. Something that always amazed me is just how fast Pixel and Kawanaka were able to finish the final release of Kero Blaster. It's super tough to pinpoint exactly when this reboot actually happened, given that both Pixel and the founder of Nicholas were discussing, teasing, and sharing photos of Kero Blaster until 2013, and the final game launching in only May of 2014. Is it possible that the Kero Blaster we know was finalized in only 7 to 8 months? Well, I'm not saying that's for sure the case, but we do know that Pixel does love to work fast. Having most of the programming, assets, and sprite work done would definitely help that case. On top of having Kawanaka's direction, I fully believe that the development reboot took Pixel less than a year to transform Star Frog into the Kero Blaster we know and love today. But this wasn't the last we'd see of Star Frog. Beginning in 2022, Pixel would begin to share so much more on cut content, screenshots, and development shots from his unfinished projects. Primarily, he showed off Rockfish and Star Frog. Media he shared for Star Frog specifically included the opening cutscene running an engine, cut music, and a plethora of funny little guys that would be enemies in the beta, with a few even making it into the final game. What you're listening to now is even the cut tutorial track from the game. This massive info dump from Pixel is the last he'd ever seriously share from Star Frog and Kero Blaster. This is not the last we'd see from the game, however. In case none of you have caught on, what you've been watching this entire time is actual gameplay footage of Star Frog. In winter 2023, the now infamous Apple test flight leak happened. Along with it were multiple builds of Star Frog, the latest being version 0.118. The only reason I feel mentioning the version number is important is because the version we see in the Kero Blaster trailer is version 0.6, a much more polished version of the game. I don't know how to properly go about covering the leaked build, as it feels like a disservice to Pixel, but ultimately I decided covering it just a tad would be important to make this video as definitive as possible. With that said, in this next segment, I would like to lightly touch on what I feel is a safe overview of the build. And with that said, the beta feels almost complete. There's actual hours of a fully playable experience here, albeit a lightly buggy one. There's 7 completed areas, the first being actually strikingly similar to Winterland Fort from the final game. There's also tons of fun characters to see, including this cool-ass shop cat who smokes a cigarette and doubles as a regular save point. The bosses in this game are also insanely fun to battle against. My personal favorite being this giant fairy lady that you literally just saved. The fight is preceded by a 2D aerial dogfight between you and a swarm of wasps trying to stop you from saving the boss's smaller fairy friends. While a lot of the stuff in this build was clearly reworked into the Kero Blaster we know today, there's a lot of scrapped movement items like an umbrella that allows you to glide, boss battles and power-ups that never made it into the final game, but still play and feel like they belong in Kero Blaster in the form of a sequel or an update. What we have of Star Frog is super cute and fun, given that you aren't looking at it as a complete or fully polished game experience. Hell, you can even see here that an ionizing space particle managed to affect my game. The build does end quite abruptly. I didn't even realize I made it to the end of the game until I reached out to some friends who'd helped me confirm that I had reached what was left. And this was even after community member Rain smoothed out the experience to include levels that were found in the game but slightly unfinished. The build itself is archived in a neat package that's even controller friendly to those who are curious in playing it. You can find what you'd need to play it on the Cave Story tribute site. Alright, now with Star Frog basically fully covered, it's about time we dig into the main event here. Kero Blaster, the first major project from Daisuke Amayasun's Cave Story, is also an insanely cute run-and-gun platformer with a story about toxic workplace environments. You play as a frog, an unnamed hero who simply goes by the hero in the game's official manual. As I mentioned before, the beta was a story about a frog trying to save a cat that he was in love with, but the final game is actually surprisingly deep, yet a nice and welcome change. The plot change can be seen immediately, as the game opens up with the scene of the hero walking into the office of his boss, a cat named Nanao. She speaks a language you don't understand, but is clearly pissed off. Apparently, the company has seen some better days. The company in question being Cat and Frog Inc., a teleporter company. According to our cat friend Sasuke, you work in custodial sciences, which is totally what I'll be putting down on my resume if I ever end up working as a janitor. Wait a minute, Sasuke, that's right! Sasuke is one of our few friends and coworkers. He's a cat with a clipboard who's typically responsible for managing the teleporter we so often use to get from job site to job site. He's also often seen side by side by yourself and another silly creature named Komomo. Oh my gosh, I forgot about Komomo. Hang on, forgive me gang, we gotta back up just a little bit. During the build-up to the release of Kero Blaster, Kawanaka would create a small game known as Pink Hour. This small demo would demonstrate the main mechanics and run-and-gun nature of Kero Blaster to people who are able to attend special video game-based events like PAX. This demo would feature its own unique story, levels, and protagonist, that being Komomo, a small pink creature who works as Nanao's assistant. Fun little fact, the game uses the trailer music for Star Frog as its title theme. I'm glad to see that even the song has found its own special purpose in Komomo. As mentioned before, this game serves as a demo, but only by context. As I mentioned, the game has its own unique story, involving Komomo needing to go out and obtain an important document and bring it to Nanao. Upon finding said document, you must traverse through a tricky platforming level without getting hit. Taking any kind of damage, even non-fatal, will cause the important document to tear before you're able to deliver it. This simple idea of having to deliver a paper and the paper itself taking damage has opened the door for being able to get multiple endings. One for delivering the paper and one for not doing so. I know it's not exactly a big deal for demos to have multiple endings anymore, but for an indie game's demo to be a miniature spin-off with multiple endings is just super cute. Aside from being just super cute, the game genuinely serves as a cute way to show off the actual game's basic mechanics of running and gunning, but does things to make the experience unique. The demo is short, fun, and still available on both PC and mobile for free. So if you're a Kero Blaster fan and this has completely slipped your radar, I'd highly recommend you give it a shot, especially after getting through its endings. After releasing the demo publicly, the demo would then be updated to have a brand new hard difficulty unlocked after completing the best possible ending of a normal playthrough. This hard mode would also include its own unique endings, because of course it would. Pixel and Kawanaka are at the wheel here. And if you thought we were done there, think again, because not only does this demo spin-off have its own crazy plot, gameplay, and protagonist, but it also has its own sequel. I know, before Cave Story, it's crazy. Pink Heaven serves as a direct sequel to Pink Hour, and is also a demo of sorts to Kero Blaster, but the demo really feels like Kawanaka wanted to take the much simpler gameplay of Pink Hour and take it as far as it could possibly go. Pink Heaven, once again, tells its own unique story that continues from where you leave off in Pink Hour's hard mode ending. And it takes you for a cute ride of being the best Komomo you could possibly be. Pink Heaven even added its own unique individual option of a weapon or movement upgrade. The cute part is that the movement upgrade in this game is actually this umbrella from Star Frog. And that's such an incredibly cute use of beta assets, it's just charming me out of my mind. I won't go too in-depth as to why Komomo is in heaven. I would really encourage you to play both Pink Hour and Pink Heaven to find out. They're both incredibly short, even if you're going for every possible ending. Okay, with Komomo now out of the way, let's get back to Kero Blaster. Now that we're back to the frog, the trio of Sasuke, Komomo, and the hero form this small team that manages cleaning and checkups for Cat and Frog Inc.'s teleporters. The game revolves around these checkups and discovering that teleporters in mass are being infested by these strange black things, as the game describes them. Something I love about the simple narrative is that it gives Pixel a simple reason to the player as to why the locations of the game are so vastly different from one another. Most games usually have you traverse the entire world, region to region, as if you're on this grand quest, but Kero Blaster never really does that, and I feel like it never wants you to feel that way either. Okay, well, it does want you to feel like your work is doing something and the player is having fun, but it does a good job of reminding the player that, hey, just so you know, you're in the swamp because it's your job as a custodial scientist. Running a teleporter business attracts a lot of clients, it seems. It's quite interesting to think that Star Frog would have been exactly what this game isn't, by the way. Saving a damsel in distress, traversing the world to save her on an epic quest of adventure. Maybe the plot simplicity is why Pixel scrapped the game, With all this said, Kero Blaster's plot is kinda tough to continue talking about. Despite how much its charming plot outline is adored, there's really very few times you go through the story. It comes in small yet rewarding bits, so we're unfortunately at a point where I must drop a spoiler warning. If you haven't played Kero Blaster, please do. It's an incredibly fun game that goes on sale quite often, I should add. To those still out there, let's continue with that story, however. I mentioned before the roles of Komomo, Sasuke, and the hero, but what exactly are they doing? Well, the game starts with simply that. Just a group of co-workers following orders from their boss. Their boss, Nanao, has been really angry and losing her temper more and more. The group believes it's because of all the trouble with their work. As you progress, the boss seems to begin to lose herself, growing larger in rage and size as well. Her pet behind her is even going through similar changes. Despite this, the group believes that the work getting done will at least ease some of her tension. Something I should note about the story is that it is almost entirely told through these conversations between Sasuke and Komomo. In a way, it almost feels like the anime manga for Koma. The hero himself is a silent protagonist. I guess he has a bit of a throat croak. Nanao also speaks, but she speaks with a foreign language that the protagonist doesn't seem to quite fully understand. I guess we perceive the game the way the hero does, as he fully understands conversations with Komomo and Sasuke. At least, the game kinda implies he does. Anyways, after cleaning more and more teleporters, you get saved at the last moment, despite being surrounded by more of these black creatures we mentioned earlier. After some recovery time, Sasuke informs us of their true nature. These black creatures are known as Negativus Legatia. Negativus Legatia are creatures on the outside, but Sasuke describes them as pieces of your past that have been cast off. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Just what could this mean? Negativus Legatia. Certainly leaves room for theories, and when directly asked more about what the plot means, Pixel himself has gone on to say that he'd like each individual player to interpret these scenes exactly how they make the player feel. So please, tell me what the hell he meant by this. I certainly have my own theories that I'll get into later, but for now, let's get back to that story. Upon the realization that Nanao's pet creature is also Negativus Legatia, Sasuke takes it upon himself to open himself and Komomo to taking care of her pet. We know these things are bad news, especially after what they did to the hero, but he made it out with seemingly just a scratch. Nanao has been with her pet for who knows how long. Sasuke does truly believe that taking care of the pet will allow Nanao and themselves to get more of a break and even less overtime. That last part seemingly convincing Komomo to help. Believe it or not, it isn't until that we get to this point in the story that the locations now begin to matter. Sure, there were plenty of enemies and bosses to defeat to complete our jobs in previous areas, but now we have a purpose for each area we visit. Sasuke informs us of the conversation that Negativus Legatia are seemingly coming out of a broken server at a place called Hikechi Plateau. Before this, we've been completing jobs for just that reason. It's our job to do so. This makes me come to the realization that I haven't even mentioned the levels themselves. Compared to Cave Story, they're far more simple. Kero Blaster is a platformer after all. Its level layouts aren't as in-depth as the big map layouts from Ika-chan or Cave Story, but Kero Blaster makes up for it with enemy variety and details. Especially from this point forward, I feel like Kero Blaster becomes more and more fleshed out the further you go in. The opening level, Hinterland Fort, is quite basic, with enemies mostly being plants that will stay in place or jump at most. As I mentioned before, this level is actually quite similar to the opening level from Star Frog, so Pixel must have really liked how its simplicity introduced the game to the player. But don't let that simplicity take your attention away from the enemies themselves, or the plants in the area, or even the background. Hinterland Fort is by far the most simple, but again, Kero Blaster becomes more and more fleshed out as you progress. Just compare Hinterland Fort to our next area in the story, Hikechi Plateau. It's almost night and day with its detail and background, with Hikechi taking you from simple mountains into forests and even creating the game's own little pseudo-outer cave moment. This detail I feel like was only possible because of Pixel's collaboration with Kawanaka. I'm not trying to say that Pixel's sprite work is bad by any means. I mean, look at the game itself. But being able to have the support of Kawanaka for level design allowed the effort of detail in stages to be made. Once again, let's look at Hikechi and compare it to Star Frog's snow level. It's a complete gorgeous overhaul. Getting back to the story of the game, upon making it through Hikechi Plateau, we seemingly do some major slowdown of the Negativus Legatia. Sasuke contacts us and lets us know that we're able to simply head back to the company, but lets us know that there isn't a teleported device at the end of this level like there have been so far, and we've got to take the train. After getting through a small hiccup, seemingly caused by the leftover Negativus Legatia, we make it, and here we begin what I feel like is Kero Blaster's actual outer wall moment. Seriously, the music that plays during the second half of Train Station is absolutely beautiful, and the level itself is far from hard. If anything, with the weapons the player has at this point, should make the level more rewarding to go through rather than it be a challenge. While it's certainly not as emotionally impacting as Outer Wall, for me anyways, Train Station is so gorgeous, I just had to make a little segment on it. After defeating a giant iconic clockman, we find ourselves catching up with Sasuke and Komomo, who are on their way to take out Nanao's pet. They realize that they have to act fast, as the pet has now turned into this giant unrecognizable blob, and to make matters worse, Nanao has appeared just moments before their attempt to take it out. But it's too late for any of them, as Sasuke and Komomo are consumed by the pet, and Nanao is immediately put into her giant angered state. This even causes the city itself to be entirely consumed by the darkness of Negativus Legatia. After making our way to the rooftop with the others, we find ourselves up against the angered Nanao. Thankfully, she's not too hard to fight off as a boss, and upon defeating her, she immediately goes in to check on the state of her pet. It's found herself where it usually is, in the corner of Nanao's office, a place where the beast itself has managed to find comfort and never intended on changing that. After yelling at us one final and violent time, Nanao herself is betrayed by the pet, absorbing her into itself. It's here that we get the game's true final boss, the president's pet. We can also see that both Komomo and Sasuke are trapped inside the beast. And it's with this little tidbit that I feel like I can finally discuss my own theory on what Kero Blaster's story actually means. To me, Kero Blaster is simply a game built in a silly world that tells the story of unattended depression, with Nanao serving as our real main character, and her pet being a physical representation of her mental state. From the beginning, we see Nanao is already more upset than usual, with the opening lines of the game leaving our trio curious as to what could have her so upset. As we progress with our day, believing small actions will help, they don't tackle the problem at hand. Instead, every time we see Nanao, she's worse, and eventually spouting out nonsense that, might I add, is in the form of Negativus Legatia. Not only this, but her pet grows more and more the further Nanao indulges in this state. The Negativus Legatia is also finding itself in other areas quickly, but more important, areas immediately affected by workplaces Nanao helps manage. Her depression is leaking into her work. Sasuke even mentions how she's taken so much of a liking to the creature, a possible reference to how easy it is for people to be fixated and absorbed in their own depression to a point where our brains mistake it for a feeling of comfort. Upon trying to help solve the issue from the source, the way Sasuke believes it will help, we forget one thing, and that's Nanao herself. We spend the entire game trying to take out the Negativus Legatia, but never directly help Nanao until the final boss. Even the pet itself helps drive this point home. The way it finds comfort is in Nanao's office, specifically the corner of the office where she will always be. It doesn't want to leave the office. It doesn't want people to bother it, using Nanao's anger to even scare people away. Eventually, the world is absorbed in Negativus Legatia's darkness. To me, this didn't make any sense, as we completely destroyed the source of the creatures. Well, this easily fits into this theory, as I believe the world being overtaken is purely from the perspective of Nanao. Your worldview changes as depression gets worse and worse, and even when we finally defeat the pest, all the Negativus Legatia completely disappears. I know a lot of people are getting tired of the depression angle in stories recently. It feels like a lot of games nowadays do it to a point where it feels like it's the modern day dream theory. And I kinda get it. A lot of games, especially from the late 2010s and onward, take this angle. But to me it's never been much of a problem, as, in my experience at least, the recovery process has always led people to make beautiful pieces of art in the form of these games. I feel like I should also say that this is by no means to say that depression isn't important, by the way. Please, if you are feeling or seeing signs of depression in yourself, I strongly urge everyone get the help that they need, as there is no shame in it. And unfortunately, there's no bipedal leather jacket wearing frog with laser Uzis here to help us in our world. To get back to the game, I feel this theory makes almost too much sense. Even when the game is completed, Sasuke tells us that he wishes he caught on to the Negativus Legatia much sooner. We even get the hilarious reveal that the president isn't even upset about the death of her pet, with Sasuke even saying that she must not have been as fond of the pet as they believed. All the pieces just fit too well in my opinion. And with all that said, that's Kero Blaster. Isn't that game just the bee's knees? Finally, just like that, I've finally finished the Kero Blaster video. I really am surprised with how much I love this game. While it's generally agreed that this game is far from the same scale as Cave Story, don't let that turn you away from it. It's an incredibly fun game that plays just as smooth, if not smoother than Cave Story in a lot of areas. And honestly, I hate to tell you all this, but thank goodness this video is finally done. I couldn't imagine being here, hunched over my laptop in some random undisclosed coffee shop, typing as if I'm some corporate office worker trying to crunch in some overtime. Oh, fuck, I said overtime. Without even realizing it, y'all have just entered the bonus part of the video, where I'll be going over Kero Blaster's bonuses, like secret modes, weapons, and other tidbits I feel are worth mentioning. So once again, if you've completed Kero Blaster, I'd like to drop another spoiler warning as things get pretty intense in this next segment. Possibly the biggest known secret in Kero Blaster is Zangief mode, otherwise known as Overtime mode. When I first played and completed Kero Blaster, I simply viewed Zangief mode as some kind of New Game Plus or hard mode, and didn't even play it thinking that it was just as simple as that. After doing a tiny bit more digging into the game, making sure that this video was complete, of course, I learned that it is much more than just that, and picked the controller right back up. While it certainly is described as just a hard mode, Zangief mode turns the game into its own sequel more than it does serve as a simple hard mode. For starters, the game gets its own unique story. Don't worry, I won't be as in-depth as earlier, but the story itself does start us off with the co-workers finishing up some work and getting ready for a business-wide vacation, when suddenly, it's revealed that Sasuke and the hero are absolutely swamped with work still, and would rather knock it all out of the way before their vacation starts. Sasuke assures Komomo that they'll be done quickly and catch up with her and the president when they're all done. When it comes to playing the actual game, oh, it's much harder. Remember how I mentioned that Hinterland Fort was simple and the enemies simply stayed still or jumped at most? Well, now, there's plenty of pits to fall in. Enemies are now running at you, and of course, you're starting all the way back at 2 HP and a simple pea shooter. From what I understand, Zangief mode's plot was worked on by Kawanaka at the wheel, but the overall mode definitely feels like Pixel and Kawanaka did a fusion dance in an attempt to take players to their limits with this game. While I'll be the first to tell you that there certainly are much harder games out there, Zangief mode took me for a ride, and its difficulty led to my own personal playthrough being a couple hours longer than my initial Kero Blaster run. The game does a bunch of world building in cute ways, even introducing a younger version of Nanao and her old boss, who ends up being important later on. Without Negativus the Geisha though, a new big bad is introduced in the form of a salesman named Kurono. Kurono is a businessman who seems to have been in business for a while, going from business to business, selling just that, more business. The entire game revolves around Kurono trying to sell a new work-producing machine, a machine that does exactly that, produces more work out of thin air. It's here where our plot lies. Not just to complete our overtime work, but to get rid of overtime as a whole by destroying the work-producing machine. As I mentioned before, the game does kinda serve as a hard mode, as it takes you through a lot of the same levels in the game. And while they aren't entirely revamped completely, this doesn't mean that there isn't a new area, and this new one's a doozy. Instead of going back to the office, the game entirely replaces Stage 7 with Destination, and you have to survive through more screens than any other in the game. For starters, I just want to talk about how absolutely gorgeous this area is. It almost feels rewarding just making it to this level. You start off headed to a broken down tunnel where you'll find 2 penguins ready to take you on a ride through the entire following beach area of Destination. The downside to going with the penguins is that you miss out on the rewards of the actual enemies, and the penguins will not stop at the area's only shop. They simply keep chugging you through the entire opening section. While it's not hard to just jump off of their cart at any point, jumping off at any point will lead you to have to fight a plethora of enemies on screen, with the benefit being that you get a chance to grab any coins, or if you're lucky, 1-ups that they'll drop as well. Of course, the downside to jumping off the cart being that the level nearly doubles in length if you want to play it out. If I had to recommend you do one, it's definitely play the level out, and become a smart shopper for 1-ups and a life pot. Not to mention that you get to take in the beauty of a beach full of trash. I hate to admit it, but the trashy beach with a rundown highway is one of the best looking areas in the game. The following areas are themed around traditional Japanese buildings and torii gates, although they are abandoned. Seriously, a trashy beach into abandoned buildings? No wonder Kurono has been able to keep this business hidden for so long. After you're making your way through this area, which has no shortcut like the penguins, you make your way to a giant factory, and inside holds the key to finally taking a vacation: the work-producing machine. The boss is really cute and a fun fight that's really reminiscent of the Undead Core fight to those who have played Cave Story as well. Tons of projectiles, only open to damage when it wants you to damage it. It's a really fun fight regardless. I just thought it was worth noting. Something else the work producing machine shares similar with the Undead Core is that it's only the beginning of a multi-boss gauntlet. While defeating the work producing machine once allows you to bypass it for a second time, allowing the boss to defeat you sends you all the way back to the beginning of Destination. That's right, you gotta redo the entire area if you game over, and moving past the work producing machine, this rule continues to apply. The only reason I feel the work producing machine doesn't respawn is because it'd be cruel to respawn it after finding out there's an entire tower to climb after surviving and defeating it. This level isn't exactly the hardest in the game, but you gotta keep in mind, you'll only be playing this section after walking through all of Destination or after fighting the work producing machine. Anyways, making your way up the tower, you find yourself face to face with Korono and a secret corrupt corporate businessman. If you paid attention to Zangyumode's story, you'll know that this is actually Nanao's ex-boss from when she was younger, but he's heavily overworked and crazed, completely succumbed to the intense workforce of the work producing machine. This boss fight is where I feel the real gauntlet begins, as Nanao's boss, who's named Ushima by the way, is nuts. While Ushima himself is quite the big target, I'll say to not be so rude, you have to thread a lot of needles, as he's constantly moving off screen or quickly while throwing unbreakable projectiles that protect him. I wouldn't even say he's as tough as the work producing machine from a technical level, but he certainly does take you for a ride. But making it past him, you begin to fight against the big guy himself, the true final boss of Kero Blaster, Korono. Korono truly is someone who makes sure that you have Kero Blaster movement and weapons down. You know, unless you have Laser Uzi. But even if you did, Korono will constantly keep you in check with movement and jumping by producing enemies at random to fight. You'll also have to engage with them as they become annoying pokes fast. Korono also fires these lasers if you aren't pressuring him enough, and these lasers cannot be pierced and trap you with summoned enemies easily. Again, really keep that Laser Uzi close and handy. The room and the vibe it builds in this boss fight is also so tense, as the almost cloudy border makes the room feel claustrophobic, and I kinda dig it. I know I said I tried not to ramble about Zangyumode, but oh my gosh, it's so good, including this Korono fight. I hate to say it, but this fight is as far as I'll talk about with Zangyumode. I won't talk you through to the end of it. I think even just discussing the beginning of Korono's fight and in depth about Destination is a lot, but it's some of the best gameplay that Kero Blaster has to offer in my opinion. Plus, with Korono being the true final boss of the game, I feel like I had to at least get his portion of the game discussed. This video isn't supposed to be an artsy commentary like my Cave Story video, so I can at least leave you on some small cliffhanger on how the game truly ends. It's not exactly a massive life-changing ending by the way, but it is incredibly cute, and I feel satisfying for the cute nature of Kero Blaster. The one thing I can mention, however, is what the ending allows you to access. Upon beating the game, in what feels like a super cute personal moment where an in-game weapon upgrader walks up to you, he asks if you were satisfied with your experience with Kero Blaster. There's no reason to answer him. The game doesn't collect data from you or anything, and telling him you had a good time makes him happy and sends you about your day. How cute! Answer about wanting more, however. Welcome to Omake Mode. Omake Mode is what I feel the game's true New Game Plus. You get to keep all your weapons and their upgrades, but your money is completely taken away from you. And once again, your health is brought back down to 2 HP. While I'm sure the challenge sounds fun, and it is, there's only one real reason I feel to personally go through it, and that's the collection of a secret weapon called the Kero Blaster. Before I go ahead a bit further, one thing I should mention about the Kero Blaster specifically is that it was originally a fairly easy weapon to obtain before. Simply play Omake mode and the Kero Blaster and its upgrades can easily be grabbed in various small rooms that are sneakily placed, but otherwise just out in the open. These areas being Hinterland Fort, OXOX Hotel, and White Laboratories. This isn't the case anymore though, with the update that added Zangief mode making it much different. The footage you're looking at now isn't even mine, unfortunately. The credit here goes to user @SteamBoy27 here on YouTube. Thanks for them for helping me preserve and talk about the footage of the previous build. Getting back to the Kero Blaster, while the stages to obtain the weapon remain the same, the areas are not. I present to you the Omake levels. Now, when I first heard that this happened after an update, I was certain that these levels were some kind of glitch in the code caused by the update. As it turns out, I was wrong. Despite these levels having broken sounds, elements that are kinda just splattered everywhere, and sprites that go completely unused until now, and even no music, these levels are 100% intentional. In fact, I kinda lied about the music part. These levels technically do have music, with their file names simply being labeled in the game's files as KBX, KBY, and KBZ. That, along with the fact that these levels are playable and, despite their visual absurdity, can be finished, leads me to believe that this was no accident or glitch caused by some update, but instead some kind of new mysterious way to add a secret ending level not too different from the Bloodstained Sanctuary and Cave Story. When it comes to the weapon itself, it is incredibly fast and a nearly overpowered weapon that certainly feels like a perfect post-game weapon. Its first form fires at insane speeds, just melting the life bars of anybody in the stream of Negativus Legatia? Some kind of weird bluish blobs are the ammo for this weapon. I certainly hope they aren't alive, but they do certainly do damage. Their next upgrade increases the damage of the weapon and causes the bullets to fire in a giant circular pattern, similarly to a figure 8. This upgrade does an insane amount of damage, and unlike a lot of the other weapons in Kero Blaster, actually fires through walls. Technically the first version of the Kero Blaster fires through walls, but it only really becomes useful at the range and damage of the second version. The third version of the weapon combines the shot spread of the previous two, and creates a near perfect weapon that both protects the always moving hero and fires insanely strong and fast. Omake mode is far from just a visual trip, however, for just obtaining the Kero Blaster, by the way. Given that you're actually able to traverse these crazed Pac-Man level 256 style levels, the game finishes by putting you through a boss rush with every single boss in Kero Blaster. Well, okay, every boss in normal mode of Kero Blaster. The rush doesn't include any of the bosses from Zangief mode, but that would be insanely fun to see in maybe some kind of anniversary patch or re-release of the game. What's incredibly strange about beating the boss rush is that upon completing it, you're rewarded with a completely brand new credit sequence, revealing the names of every character in the game, similarly to Cave Story. And it's incredibly adorable to see these small, quick shots of every character like it's the end of a movie. It also completes this kind of pattern of every single mode having its own unique credit sequence, which is cute. And if you think we're completely done with secrets in Kero Blaster, don't worry, we still got a few more to go. Since the secret of the Kero Blaster has just been covered, I want to continue discussing the topic of secret weapons. I should also mention that Kero Blaster has a couple of cut weapons as well. Believe it or not, these cut weapons were only partially cut for a while, but then fully removed, seemingly after the Zangief mode update, but that's just from a personal search. It's possible that they were removed sooner or even after Zangief mode was added, but it's been so long, it's getting harder to pinpoint some of these details. Anyways, before the Zangief mode update, the data for these weapons did exist in-game in a playable extent, but are now almost fully removed. The first weapon being the Death Beam. Now, despite not being in the game anymore, thankfully footage was uploaded by user BrambleBro here on YouTube, and as you can see, This weapon is just insane. It appears to be a purple version of the wide upgrade for the fan, but shoots way faster, further, and for 99 damage a shot. The next weapon we have to look at is the rocket. This weapon appears to fire the rockets at a fairly slow rate compared to other weapons we've seen in game, and even has data for an upgrade. But sadly, even the upgrade is lost, with no version of it being playable. All we have for it is this sprite of a rocket with the number 2 on it. Finally, we have the Kamui. The upside for the Kamui is that we actually have footage of it, and it is still in every modern version of Kero Blaster via the debug menu. To access the debug menu, all you have to do is pause anywhere during gameplay of Kero Blaster and input left, right, left, left, right, right, then hold down left and input up, then down. To give yourself the Kamui, simply toggle the God button. The Kamui itself visually appears as the ninja upgrade for the fan weapon, but every bullet hits for 25 damage, and because we're able to use it while in God mode, we take no damage and can hilariously destroy Hinterland Fort with it. Neat! And because I mentioned it, yes, Kero Blaster has a debug mode, but it basically works as an in-game pseudo hex editor, but also gives the player some easy access buttons versions of some easy cheats to use. Basically, debug mode is a built-in action replay to all my viewers who bought a DS instead of a PSP. The only real cool factoid I have about debug mode is that before the Zangief mode patch, there was a menu that allowed you to visit any stage in the game, with the screen being a reworked version of the map from Starfront using the same sprites and map layout. And with that, finally, I am free! It's been gosh knows how long since I've teased this project in my Ika-chan video, but it's done! Kero Blaster has finally been covered! I know I'm talking about it as if Kero Blaster has been this daunting task that it's been haunting me for years, and that's because it 100% was! But being able to sit down and completely deep dive a game like this for a couple years and get incredibly intricate and appreciate finer details was an incredibly fun experience. And Kero Blaster itself is a phenomenal game. And while I have your attention, I would love and appreciate if you could hear me for just a few shoutouts. The first people I want to shout out are a duo of artists. The first one being T10 Time, who is a friend of mine I actually met at an anime convention in my area, and they've just been such a kind and wonderful friend to me, and they were dope enough to make this beautiful thumbnail for y'all to see on this video. So big shout outs to T10 Time. Their links are in the description. The next artist I want to thank is RaymundoMiramuta, who made the Kero Sweat sprite that I used for a 2-second gag. I still feel like it's worth shouting out any person who's collaborated, and even though this was a 2-second gag, I think it's my favorite gag in the video. So thank you, Raymundo. You are super appreciated. The next person I want to thank is EnlightenedOne. Enlight is no stranger to thanks on my YouTube channel, and I want to say I'm sorry for that, but also thank you, Enlight. I really appreciate you. Enlight was able to provide information for me and answer questions no matter the time of day, no matter what day, and no matter what he was doing. Truly just one of the most flexible human beings I've ever met, and I cannot thank him enough, not just for this video, but for all the videos that he's helped me out with in the past. Sticking on the topic of information, I also want to give another huge shout out to Fox Ari. For those who don't know, this video was supposed to be done months ago, but I had some problems with my laptop, had to get a PC. I had problems with Sony Vegas, and had to completely restart this video from scratch on DaVinci Resolve. And Fox Ari was there to be able to sit down and make time for a Discord call to teach me DaVinci Resolve. Quite literally, we wouldn't be watching this video without Fox Ari's help, so thank you so much. And finally, I shouted them out in the video earlier, but Steamboy27 and BrambleBro, thank you so much for being able to provide and preserve gameplay for Kero Blaster's previous versions, like Debug and the secret weapons. Your work is truly appreciated, not just by me as a YouTuber, but myself as a fan, and I'm sure other community members will truly appreciate your efforts to help preserve this gameplay and whatnot. Thank you so much again. everybody's links will be in the description. Please check them out if y'all really want to show support. And yes, I know I didn't go specifically into detail about the true potential of debug mode, but it's quite literally a built-in action replay. I also didn't mention that the game has a special physical copy released with fun items. Here's a JPEG. The only thing I will let you crucify me over is the fact that I didn't even mention that there was a scrapped animation of the hero doing a pelvic thrust. I'm obviously a big Studio Pixel fan, and being able to complete the game that succeeded Cave Story in this major fashion was incredibly fun. I'd love to do this again for another game in the future, but for now, I'm totally fine with being able to just accept this little victory and rest on it. I do keep hearing that One Shot is a pretty good game though. Who knows, I haven't played it. For now, me and this new little frog friend I made are gonna go take a nice nap before this video becomes my own Negativus Legatia. Until my next video, and yes, there will be more, Nerdieo is out.